the final trading day for the week. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to 55 minutes of current and relevant business conversation right here on Business Morning. And of course, this is Channels Television. I'm Ini John McCann. We start business with what's going on with oil prices. Today, Friday, we see that it went up after 4 straight sessions of declines, but we're on track for their steepest weekly fall since late June. That's because of market expectations that the OPEC Plus group could hike output further despite oversupply concerns. And so we see this morning very green board, more than 1% in fact for Brent, 1.01% at $64.76 a barrel. For WTI is also up 1.09% at $61.14 a barrel. OPEC Plus could agree to raise oil production by up to 500,000 barrels per day in the month of September. That's triple the increase for October, and Saudi Arabia is seeking to reclaim market share. So that's a major driver for oil this morning. We're still talking about oil when Nigeria has become the main supplier of crude to Senegal's 30,000 barrels per day Dakar refinery, even as Dakar joins the ranks of oil producers. Last year, Senegal began pumping around 100,000 barrels a day from the Sagmar field in mid-2024. And however, virtually all of Senegal's new output is exported to Europe, with Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands taking the bulk of shipments. Industry data shows that Dakar refinery is designed to run on a lighter, sweeter grades, making the heavier, more sulfurous Zangoma crude unsuitable for local processing, and that leaves Nigeria to fill that supply gap. We're still in the oil and gas space. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Senator Heineken Lokobiri, has said that the divestments by international oil companies in the Nigerian petroleum upstream sector have added 200,000 barrels a day to national production. He also says that the divestments have unlocked over $5.5 billion in final investment decisions within months. The senator spoke on behalf of President Bola Tinubu at the Africa Energy Week, which is being covered by our correspondent Lou Phillips in Cape Town, South Africa. And global rating agency Moody's Investors Service, they've warned that Nigeria's banking sector faces fresh profitability risks after the Central Bank of Nigeria cut its benchmark monetary policy rate to 27% from 27.5%. The CBN said that the 50 basis point cuts was driven by sustained disinflation, projections of further inflation decline, and the need to stimulate economic recovery. However, Moody's has cautioned that the move could erode banks' net interest margins unless higher loan volumes offset lower yields. And Nigeria's private sector closed the third quarter firmly in growth territory as the Purchasing Managers Index posted 53.4 points in September, marking the 10th straight month above the 50-point benchmark. While slightly lower than the August 54.2, the index still reflects a solid strengthening of business conditions. The report shows marked improvement in output and new orders driven by stronger customer demand and the launch of new products. Business activity expanded sharply across all 4 major sectors, while the job creation quickened to its fastest pace since October 2023. Firms also boosted purchasing and stockpiles to meet both current and future demand as supplier delivery times shortened for a 5th straight month. More importantly, inflationary pressures eased and companies reported input costs rising at the slowest pace in 2.5 years, with purchasing price inflation at its weakest since March 2020. Although firms still lifted selling prices, output inflation was the second softest in more than 5 years. Businesses remain optimistic about the year ahead, though sentiment dipped to a 4-month low, suggesting cautious confidence as the economy continues its recovery. And then let's look at how the market closed yesterday in a positive territory, 0.19%, talking about Nigeria's stock market. And after it entered the 143,000, heading really close to 104,000 level. See right there, 143, 979. And the market cap is 90, over 90 trillion, almost 91 trillion. Looks like that's what we're heading to. Now, activity was all green at the close of trade yesterday. Both volume, value, and deals they gained. Top gainers were PZ, Etana Oil, and Champion. They were the top gainers. And on the flip side, we see RT Briscoe, Thomas Way, and Sovereign Insurance lost almost 10% each at the close of trade. And our top trades had Cornerstone, UBA, and Wema Bank. Of course, we see, as usual, the financials being the major of top trades at the close of yesterday. All right, now let's do a little bit of global history, and then we'll be back with our first conversation. Please stay with us. Yes, now let's get into our first conversation, and it's still in the mood of celebrating 65 years of independence. And of course, it was mainly October 1st, and that was on Wednesday. But the president's speech still reverberates in the mind of many, especially the line that says that the worst is over. And of course, we've seen a lot of reaction following all of that. Let's get the reaction now of the chairman, Board of Governors Institutes of Directors, and he's also an economist. We have Dr. Shoaib Idris joining us virtually from Kaduna. Dr. Idris, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Ini, and thanks for having me.
Great.
Good morning, other discussants also.
Yeah. So, I mean, the president's words, the worst is over, has had many reactions to it. What's your reaction to that phrase that he made, that the worst is over?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The president, in his Independence Day speech, said that the worst is over. What are your thoughts on that?
Sometimes President Bola Ahmed Tinubu makes certain statements that somewhat we will say political or at best propaganda. When he claims that, the bad times or the difficult times are over, one wonders what does that mean? Prices of essential goods and services are still very high. Nigerians are taxed in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. And more taxes are coming in by January when the new tax regime resumes. We will even get into the realm of harsher environment. And to worsen the situation, the trickling down effect that we always hope for in the economy is no longer there. If you observe, generally, middle class Nigerians have faced extinction and they are now even extinct. So we now have basically two classes of Nigerians, the haves and the have not. And the haves are just about 3-5% of the population. 95% of us are basically poor, majority living below poverty line, meaning we basically live below $1 to $2 per day. When a president comes out to say the hard times are over, one wonders what exactly that statement means. Is it political, or is it a propaganda, or is it a wishful thinking, or all of the above?
You are an economist and you've seen the numbers. We've seen a deceleration of inflation for 5 consecutive months. We've seen the GDP, even though it's the rebased number, we've seen it at over 4%. Are you saying that these numbers do not reflect the reality?
If you ask me, I will tell you that most of us analysts and economics are taken with a bit of, caution, if not pinch salt, of the data being released by the National Bureau of Statistics. It does appear to us there is a bit of manipulation to present a data that will be a little politically compliant with what the government wants to see. Yes, there has been a reduction in prices.
Okay, I think having a bit of a network fluctuation there with Dr. Shrai, but I mean, a worrying thing he said there, which is he doesn't think that the numbers, the data, are mostly released by the NBS when you talk about measuring inflation and that's prices. And then also when you see the growth of the economy, he doesn't think it's the reality, and he did use the word manipulation um, for maybe economic, I mean, political purposes. Of course, that's a worrying thing, and I do hope we can get him back to help us clarify what exactly he means about that allegation of manipulation of the numbers to suit some political purpose, because every economy obviously is driven by decisions made after considering data that has been presented. And if the country does not have a dependable, reliable data source, then that brings a whole lot of confusion, even to the investors that the country hopes to attract. They look at those data, but if the data does not capture what they see as the reality, then a lot of questions will come into play. But we also have to know, obviously, Dr. Schreib is an economist, so he knows this even better than I do, that when you talk about the numbers and then the reality, there's normally a lag from when you see the numbers to when especially it gets down to the micro level, which is the individual level, But I mean, we'll try and clarify this. Hopefully, we'll be able to get Dr. Schreib join us to continue that line of thought. Also, another area which is up in the news in the economy today is the revelation that the country's total foreign payments for debt servicing has reduced. It's now at 4.14%, which is about 69.1 of the country's total foreign payments. So let's look at some data about Nigeria's debt stock at this time. We see that the debt stock between 2024 to 2025, as at March 2025, it was up 149.39 trillion. And then year on year, there's been an increase by that's from March 2024 to March 2025, there's been an increase of 27.72 trillion naira. That's in a year. That has increased by that amount. Domestic is about 52.7%. Of course, we saw the government earlier this year, 2025, very busy in the fixed income market. A lot of securities were sold, and a slowdown only towards, I think, the second and the third quarter of the year. But in the earlier parts, yields were really high. Investors were making a lot of profits from the fixed income market. And so that's why we have even more domestic debt this year than last year. I think even before, a long time before now. So domestic debt is at 52.7% of total debt, while external debt is at 47.3%. A lot of people would say that this is good for the economy because it will cost less to service. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the Central Bank of Nigeria has reported lower debt servicing, especially for the external debts of the country. Looking at the timelines of debts, we see in early 2000, debt levels were very high, between 50 to 60% of the GDP. Before 2005 debt relief deal, that's a very famous Paris Club a relief that we had. And post 2005, there was a sharp decline. Debts dropped to about 12% of GDP by 2008 and 2010. 2015 onward, we saw it rising again. Talking about the movements of debt in Nigeria, rising again due to falling oil prices, revenue pressures, and increased borrowing. And then, of course, we had COVID-19 shock. That's just destroyed all the trend and saw debt surged about above 30% of GDP. For this year, 2025, debt to GDP is expected to be between 40 and 41%, reflecting continued borrowing and weaker naira. And of course, the question of we are seeing more revenue, especially with the removal of subsidy. I don't know if you saw the papers today. Opposition party PDP are asking the government to show the savings from the removal of subsidy. We know that a lot of that has gone to FAC, and that's why yesterday Ladi tried to speak to some states, which we promised to continue to touch on other states with the removal of subsidy, increase in FAC distribution to states and local governments also increased. What difference has that made? Or should we just have the subsidy and let people get it at the pump? You know, that's a conversation that Ladi started on Business Morning yesterday, in which we promised to continue touching on different states in the country. So these are the issues. These are the issues that we have as Nigeria celebrates 65 years of independence, and asking if the economy is truly independent at 65. I wonder if we have our guests now. Do we have Dr. Schweib join us? Hello, Dr. Schweib, can you hear me?
Thanks again. Yeah, I can hear you, Ini. I can hear you.
Okay,
I
all
can
right.
hear you loud and clear. Sorry,
Great.
there was a network challenge.
Exactly. So,
Yeah. The point I was trying to make before the technology gave us challenge was here we are, a government that is trying as much as possible to bring down prices through hook and crook. And they brought in, they allow companies to bring in grains, and by so doing, local prices, prices of locally produced grains went down. 100 kilograms bag of maize is going for about 20,000 naira, 22,000 naira. In an era when and where farmers did buy fertilizer at a price of 70,000 naira, this is a wrong signal, because chances are, if we are not careful, next year we could have, hunger, we could have famine in Nigeria, because farmers may not be able to have the capacity to buy fertilizer and then to till the soil and even produce basic grains. Now, when you juxtapose that with the so-called reduction in prices or inflation as is being bandied, you realize that it is more of a political gimmick rather than a kind of what I can say economic policy that posit and make sure that inflation comes down. Today, we are being told that the Nigerian banks are awash with liquidity. At the same time, you know, the naira dollar parity is improving, meaning naira is gaining value. Ordinarily, in a normal economic situation, when there is liquidity in the system, interest rate should come down, exchange rate will go up, but we are not seeing a reduction in interest rate, nor are we seeing, you know, a devaluation. So you can see that there is an abnormality, and the economic managers of this country need to be careful, because the world is a global village, and people are looking at, and there are norms in economic, you know, discourse, that once you are deviating from that norm, you are likely going to be looked at with suspicion.
No, the implication of what you're saying is of great concern. Before we lost you due to the network, you did use the word manipulation, you know, for political purpose, and that's really worrying, because the NBS releasing this data is supposed to be a guide for both domestic governments and even foreign investors' decision making. So, I mean, implying that is really worrying and of great concern, Dr. Idris.
Yeah, it's a concern to all of us. Remember, a couple of months back, we did discuss this. Sometimes they smoothen the figures just to make sure that the figures look good. But it's always better, you know, if I'm under you and I'm to advise you, I should be able to give you the raw data, instead of, making sure that I make you to feel good when you are supposed to feel concerned or even terrible, so that you can apply the necessary mechanism and measures to to improve the situation. What we are seeing from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics is somewhat more like an appendix of government. Maybe we even begin to question its independence, and maybe the need to make it independent of, say, the Ministry of Budget and Planning, so that they will not be smoothing the figures for the benefit of politicians.
All right, so I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Let me also invite in Professor Ndubuisi Nwokoma. He's the head of economics department at Caleb University. Also joins us virtually. Professor Nwokoma, good morning and welcome to the program. Hello, Prof. Could you unmute, please? Hello, Professor Nwokoma. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Great. So I would like to start. I'd like to start by getting your reaction to what the president said on Independence Day, that the worst is over.
Well, I think we don't expect anything different from what he said, because definitely, if you don't blow your trumpet, I wonder who else will blow it. So I think he's doing the normal thing by blowing his trumpet. So it's as expected. But the issue is for us to interrogate the blowing, whether it is blowing it properly, or it's a reflection of reality, or it's just a political gimmick. I think inflation definitely came down because of rebasing. I think we need to get that point clear. Inflation was over 30% when this government came into office, and then there was a rebasing that took place, in which it came down by about 10% or thereabout in about 24. So I think the issue about inflation getting better or getting improving, it's something that has to do with manipulation of figures in terms of the methodology used to calculate inflation. That's number one. Number two, the ordinary man does not agree with these figures, because in the marketplace, you can see that we don't have falling prices as would have been expected. Well, some marginal changes here and there, but largely speaking, the ordinary man is still fighting to survive. He's trying to find a way to eke out a living for himself. When it comes to the other macroeconomic indicators, like the issue of public debt and the debt service and all that, we discovered that, well, the government is saying what they want us to hear, but Nigeria is still a country that is under a heavy debt burden. That's very clear. And I think the issue is how do we deploy the money borrowed to enhance the system? Because definitely we have been told that the worst is over. But I can't really see that great signal that will tell us that the worst is over, because the economy has the micro and the macro. What they are saying that the macro is good, but the micro is not good. And definitely macro is an aggregation of micro. So if people at the bottom are saying things are not good, and people at the top, the macro indicators, the trade surplus, the exchange rate is stable, there's a disconnect. It does not tell us what the reality is when it comes to the way the economy is good. So what the president said is as expected, because definitely he must blow his trumpet. But there are more questions than answers when it comes to that broadcast.
Yeah, but Prof, isn't that because of the lag, the normal time lag, that we have to wait to see a translation of the benefits from the macro to the micro?
Well, part of it, but that is not the key issue, because when we're talking about the lag, we're talking about trickle down. Trickle down does not even work largely. Trickle down effect, which means that the top will be okay, and then it will now fall down. Trickle down does not really in many economies globally, the trickle down factor does not really work. It works marginally, because you need to address development from the grassroots, and then those positive developments will now reflect in the macro. If we have a good trade surplus, if you have stable exchange rate, how is that affecting the people down? What is the transmission effect, and how easy can we transmit? The gap is so wide, and we have to wait forever for us to see the effect at the micro level. So I agree that the gap is there, but the trickle down oftentimes does not trickle down. So government should be able to focus on development from the grassroots, bottom up. How are we talking about agri-production? How can the ordinary man go to farm, the ordinary lady in Akwa Ibom or in Abia or in Benue go to farm, or without fear of being kidnapped, the fear of being raped or fear of being killed? That is a micro. And then we talk about the price at the factory, at the farm gate price of commodities. We look at the factory gate price. How is manufacturing doing? How are we able to address the issue of infrastructure for them? How are they able to buy imported inputs at this current exchange rate of about 1,500 naira to $1, and be able to have meaningful and reasonable factory gate prices that will enhance production? And what is the level of real income that people cannot make demand on goods and services? These are the micro issues that are very important. Until that comes, that's addressed, we'll be playing with figures at the macro level, and that does not tell us the full picture of how the economy is performing.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Idris now and ask him. We've heard a lot of applause, especially from the IMF, World Bank, and all of that, of how the reforms led by President Bola Tinubu are in the right path. And we've seen the exchange rate, we've seen the gap between the official and the parallel close, and we've seen a level of stability in the last couple of months. So don't you think perhaps there are some signs or some benefits that we could celebrate for Nigeria at 65, for the administration led by President Bola Tinubu, and perhaps the path of reforms? A lot of people have said before now, subsidy had to go anyway if we wanted growth. Don't you think that perhaps there are some positives out of all of this story?
Well, in general, no matter how terrible a system is, there will certainly be an advantage or a part of it that is good. No two way about it. I'm one of those who advocated for removal of petroleum product subsidies, as well as unification of exchange rates for the benefit of Nigeria and Nigerians. However, where we differ with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and indeed, even the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, indeed disagree with the mechanism and the modus operandi of how Bola Ahmed Tinubu implemented these policies. Let me take us just briefly through the memory lane or history line. During President Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's era, or during late Sani Abacha's era, we have had removal of petroleum product subsidies. But Babangida came up with a federal urban mass transit scheme just at the point of removal of the subsidy. And the idea was let the masses breathe, let the poor breathe. So there was a suko because of the potential and consequences of the removal of the petroleum product subsidies. What did Ahmed Bola Tinubu did when he was removing the subsidy? Nothing. When late Abacha was in government, he was to remove petroleum product subsidy. He came up with PTF, the Presidential Petroleum Trust Fund, and we could see the infrastructural development that were done by the subsidy removal. In the last 24 months, what have we seen the improve? Why is the improvement in Nigeria arising from the removal of petroleum product subsidies, or the removal of subsidy on electricity, or even the unification of exchange rate? I have not seen any. And then every now and then we get inundated with propaganda that the economy is doing well.
But
Like
Dr.
I did
Idris,
say,
Dr.
even
Idris,
the Bretton Woods Institute, yeah.
Dr. Idris, don't you think that when we look at the removal of subsidy, we've seen increase in FAC. Don't you think that perhaps we should also ask the states, because they've had increase in their allocations, perhaps that's where the subsidy money is going to. Perhaps we should ask the states' governments more what they have been doing with that increased revenue.
Well, there has been increases in revenues, and to be fair to the federal government, these revenues that have accrued to the government, was it meant for the federal government alone? No, the state government and the local government also have had their own share. But the utilization of such improvement in the revenue generation across the length and breadth of the country leaves much to be desired. And, like I did say, like they say, the head, the fish start to get rotten from the head. When the center isn't showing some level of improvement in the utilization of revenue, the constituent part, the subnational, may as well go ahead and do whatever they wish to do. I'm not saying that Bola Ahmed Tinubu should be held responsible, say, for what the governor of Kaduna State is doing, or what the governor of, say, Enugu State is doing, or what have you. But then leadership means that you should lead by example. We were expecting the courageous Tinubu, who was able to remove the subsidy. The courageous Tinubu should also have ran heavily on the wastages at the center. We are supposed to implement Steve Orosanya reports, margin parastatals, MDAs, and what have you. Bola Ahmed Tinubu has not had that courage. Instead, what are we seeing? Duplication of government agencies. Why do we need the regional development commissions? What are the use of the federal ministries? So a lot of wastages are improving. You are buying yachts, you are buying private jet, you are buying another presidential jet, or this car or that. I mean, there is much that we need to do. And I keep saying, we, the elites of this country, are the problem because we seldom speak. There are very few stations like yours that is able to allow this kind of conversation to be telling the truth to power.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Idris. Let me also bring in and get the views of Professor Wokoma. Professor Wokoma, talking about turning attention to states. So even today, the PDP is asking, where is the savings from subsidy? And we know that at least some of it, I cannot say what percentage, has gone to FAC. And so there've been an increase in states and local government allocation. And anyway, local government is supposed to be autonomous now. So should we say that perhaps we should turn the attention of Nigerians to the states and ask them, the increase in your revenue, what have you been doing with it? Professor Wakoma.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know it was for me. I didn't hear. Okay.
It's for you, sir.
Okay. Can you kindly do a recount? Sorry,
Yes,
just briefly.
Okay, so, Dr. Idris was talking about savings from subsidy over the years and all of that. And we've seen it land, with the state and the local government. Should we be directing the attention of Nigerians to the state instead of just focusing on the federal?
Yeah, I think, well, yes, in some respect, we need to focus on the subnationals. But at the same time, the structure in which we now put the power in the hands of the subnational, which we know have been unaccountable to the people for a number of times. The benefits of the subsidy removals are actually known more critical, are known clearly to political office holders. The governors and others who are holding political office are the ones who are now determining the fate of the people. And just like the other colleague was saying on this program, government should have been able to find a way to direct these benefits into some critical sector, maybe infrastructural development, to get to the people directly. Now you are going through a process, going through the political office holder, you now put more money in the hands of the governors. I agree, they have more money. But to what extent is this affecting the ordinary man? So the issue of the transition between the macro and the micro. We have more money. Government is more stable when it comes to public finance. At the federal level, there's also what they need to do in terms of cutting down the cost of governance. That's a very critical point. Now, when they transmit or transfer part of these benefits to the state governors, to what extent do these ones affect the micro? Those are the issues. The trickle-down factor is very, very weak. It's very, very weak. So we cannot rely on that transfer of excess revenue to governors as a means of addressing the economic problems of the country and the needs of the ordinary man. Just like the other colleagues said, if there had been some kind of program or project in which we can say we now have investment in transportation or in agriculture or in subsidizing something that will enhance more production, that would be a better approach. Many of the governors are spending this money recklessly, and that is why we cannot see the benefits of that on the ordinary person. So I would question the process of transmission as planned by government through the subnational. That is, it has a lot of problems. But at the federal level, I'm repeating myself, the cost of governance is still very, very high. We are talking about having a new tax regime from January. When you get that much more money, how would that affect the ordinary man? These are questions. Will we not increase the spending at the various levels of government? We have more money, we now spend more on political office holders. How much of that extra money will touch the ordinary man, will affect the economy, where actually we have the production taking place in agriculture, in manufacturing, in infrastructural development, in energy. Energy is a very big issue. Now, many people are now going to install solar power in their households because government has failed in this sector. Why not tell this money is the benefits into those key sectors that will not drive development? If you now put more money in the hands of state governors, many of the states are actually as well. The governors have more money to spend. That is the issue. How is that helping the country? So that's also the challenge is questionable, whether that is the way to enhance development for the ordinary man.
All right, Prof, thank you so much for that. Drawing our attention to especially the new tax reform, which starts in January. And of course, that's expected to bring more revenue to the government. But just like the subsidy removal, what's the plan to ensure that that more revenue is effectively used? And of course, both of our guests mentioned the issue of the cost of governance and leakages within the government, both at the central and at the subnationals. Well, these are issues we'll ponder on and try to speak to, especially by next week when we try to get more states on board on this conversation. But I have to thank you both for coming on the program. The head of economics department at Caleb University, Professor Ndubisi Nwokoma, joining us virtually from Abia State, and then Dr. Shuaib Idris, the chairman, Board of Governors Institute of Directors, and also an economist, joining us virtually from Kaduna State. I appreciate your time and your views this morning.
Thank you.
Talking about the tax reform, how will you calculate your tax so you ensure you're not owing the government and you're not being cheated? We'll tell you about that after the break. Please stay with us. So the new tax regime begins in January. We're in October, you just have November, December. But how should you calculate your tax to ensure you're not caught in the middle? Anyway, we have Adebo Onifade. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Dillon Apps, and he's also the founder of HRP Hub. Joins us virtually from Boston to show us how to calculate our tax. Hi, Debo. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Good to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. So it's going to be a very, knowing Mr. Taiwo Edele is going to ensure, that everyone follows this new tax reform. But it should be a normal thing. I mean, you are in the US and you don't joke with your tax. And sometimes you have to employ the services of a consultant. But you spoke with me before now and said, oh, individuals do not have to employ the services of tax consultants, that they can actually calculate their tax by themselves. So I wonder if you're ready, if you could show us, how this can be done by individuals to see how perhaps depending on what you earn, if you are an employer, of course, you still have to pay tax because of your business. If you're an employee, you have to pay tax. If you're in the informal sector where we have a huge number of Nigerians, depending on your income, obviously, you still have to pay tax. So we'll have Debo join us, but, well, for our DSTV viewers, you may not see that, except you come.
My screen?
Yeah, just a minute, Debo, just a minute, because we have to lead our DSTV viewers to Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory, specifically at the Transcorp Hilton, where there's a General Lucky Rabo book presentation is holding there. That's for our DSTV viewers. But if you want to continue watching Business Morning, just jump on YouTube on the next stream, and then you can still continue here. So, Debo, please show us, using, of course, some figures that may not obviously be the right one, or it may not actually be a real one, how we can calculate our tax from January. Everybody has to know something about this.
Thank you very much. So I'll show you. So government released a tax calculator application, and then I'll show you that, and I also show you a free calculator that we at HRP have released. So the government calculator, let's use 2 million as an example. You're making 2 million, okay, and then you click calculate. It compares the old and the new. That's a good part. Shows you that you actually you'll be paying less. From January 1. So now you're paying 2 million, you're paying 15,000 per 15,000 per month, and then next year you start paying the old one is 15,500, one at the right, and next year you start paying 15,000. The difference becomes more significant if you increase the value. Let's say I go to let's say 10 million, you can have a greater difference. So you can see 132,000 to 138. Now, if you use our calculator, the good thing in our calculator is that it gives you a lot of flexibility to change between full-time and contractor, because in Nigeria there are two types of government taxes individuals in two ways. As a full-time, the payee applies to full-time people, but if you have contractors, you can just do withholding taxes from them. So if you select contractor, calculation changes entirely. And if you select full-time, if you select full-time, your calculation is consistent with the payee law. Now, it also allows you to, so let me put 2 million here, 2 million gross. Now, because there are some tax components that are dependent on there are some tax calculations like pension that is dependent on certain components of your gross. This allows you to have those components, unlike the government calculator that just showing annual gross. Here you can see just random ratio. You have the basic, you have housing, you have transport, and those ones are required when calculating pension. And so if you scroll down, you can see your pension is calculated. In Nigeria, we have two pension calculations. One is employee contribution, one is employer. The employer is a top up 10% of the housing, basic, and transport, while the employee is 8%. It's that's part of the gross. So that is calculated here, and you can toggle. So this gives you flexibility. If your company is very small, they're not doing pension yet, less than 5, you can toggle. Just turn it off. Then NSITF is also calculated. This doesn't show on the government application. I think it allows you to manually input it. Here, the calculation is done for you. At NSITF, a lot of big companies remit that. The law requires it, and then you can also turn it off and on if you're in a company where that's not currently being paid. You have the NHF also, which is also part of the tax component in Nigeria. That also you can turn on and off. The calculation is ready for you, and then and like I said, this is free. Just making this available. Other statutory, and then now in the new law, there's a difference between the old and the new in the area of rent relief. In the old law, we had two reliefs: 200,000 naira, as well as 20% of the gross, or 1% of the gross, whichever is higher. Either 1% of the gross or 20%, whichever is higher. But the new law just gives you opportunity to it gives you one relief, 20% of your rent. However, if it's higher, if 20% of your rent is higher than 500,000 naira, you are only able to claim 500,000. That 500,000 is the maximum you can claim. That's the cap. So and then the law requires that HR should request for your rent receipt. There's still a lot of arguments about how HR is going to implement that. So if I have a rent of let's say I've given proof to my HR rent relief allowance, say 20 hold on. So let's say I put 20, let me say 10 million. Yeah, I need to put my rent. I haven't imputed my rent. Okay. So annual rent paid by employer. So this, okay, so that's paid by employee. I need to put that, let's say I put 10 million there. Now the system calculates 20% of that, eventually. So if I click on calculate tax, it gives you, but it's giving 500,000 naira cap, which is the maximum. So if you go to the right side, you see the tax calculated. Now, according to the new, so you see annual net salary that's deducting all those pension and so on. And then if you deduct the RSA from it, that is rent, the rent relief, it gives you that final value. Remember, if there is no proof, the rent relief allowance is zero. You have to give your your receipt, your rent receipt, your HR, that proof is required in this new law. That wasn't required in the previous law.
Okay,
And then
but let
this
me
is
just ask you. I mean, and I'm sure that, I mean, the details of it cannot be exhausted in one segment of a program. So an example is this rent proof you're talking about. This is Nigeria. If you want receipts, we know where to get receipts. If you want certificates, we know where to get certificates. So, and that's why I want to ask this question, the issue of manipulation of the system. So even before now, we know that even when some companies pay rent, I mean, pay their taxes, there are talks that they don't pay what they're supposed to pay. You just settle a couple of people, and then, you know, do you see this new system? Do you see it curbing some of those excesses and leakages? You know, talking about the system generally, the reforms, and there's e-invoicing now, which the FIRS has already started working on. Do you see some of these gaps being closed?
So yeah, so the answer is yes. I'll tell you the biggest incentive in this new tax law, and it's not common for me to say positive about this government, but I need to be fair. This tax law is fantastic, fantastic. The new tax law, for example, 0 to 800,000, zero tax. Now that would motivate many companies, because what has been the problem with tax compliance? One has been the cost of compliance. You know, you have to hire an accountant, you have to calculate properly. Second is you're paying somebody peanuts and you're still deducting tax. So many companies are reluctant to even deduct because they're paying people peanuts. The old tax law from 300,000, next 300 by 2.8 million naira gross. You're already paying 15. You're already paying 21% tax. With the new law, 800 to 3 million is 15. So by far, this new law will motivate people to pay taxes, because if you're paying people 65,000 naira per month, no tax, and then you have 800 to 3 million, a very wide gap, you're doing just 15%. One. The other
No,
was
Debo, because we
300.
don't have a lot of time. Can we see your face? We know you're sharing your screen. Maybe you should stop. So, I mean, our viewers will know who's talking. Let's see your face as you give these concluding thoughts, you know, about the new tax. So we know who's
So I was saying
talking.
that there's a big motivation for you to remit, because the tax, you're paying less tax, and 0 to 800,000 is zero tax. 800,000 to 3 million is about 15%. You have a big gap. So unlike the previous tax that was more complicated and you had to pay. So from about 0 to 18 million, 18 million per annum, the taxes are lower for Nigerians. And so I'll say that the calculations are easier. The figures you're remitting are as much lower than before. I think that's an incentive for employers to pay. And then that's part of why the other problem was calculation, how to is compliance. I don't, as a small business owner, I don't have enough money to hire a tax consultant, and that's why, we created something as a free calculator like this, and we need to encourage other people to make such free services available so that small businesses can calculate free of charge. And again, because the amounts are smaller, I think there's an incentive to remit. So I think this will help, no doubt. In terms of, you talked about, I think your second
Leakages,
question was,
leakages in the system.
yeah, yeah.
Leakages,
So,
manipulation of the.
yeah. So again, I strongly believe that because the calculations are easier and because the values are smaller, I think more smaller businesses will be willing to. For the bigger ones, and let me also say other good things. Even for corporate taxes, you have a lot of things that have changed. 0 to 50 million right now per year is zero VAT remittance. You don't need to bother yourself with VAT. That is huge. You don't need to bother yourself with a lot of withholding taxes for small companies, 2 million and below transactions, as long as they are regular admin small transactions. That is huge. So
Okay.
cost of compliance will reduce a lot, and I think that this is one of the best things this government has done.
All right, Dable, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate you sharing that with us, especially the website, which is free to access, and anybody can calculate how much they have to pay for taxes and do not have to employ the services of tax consultants. Dable Onifade is the founder of HRPay Hub, and he's also the Chief Executive Officer of Deal on Apps. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Almost out of time, but we have to tell you some things happening in the global space. The first thing we'll tell you is Turkey's annual inflation rate jumped to 33.29% in September. That's well above expectations, according to data, reinforcing concerns that the central bank may need to slow its monetary policy. And then away from that, in Spain, service sector has expanded at a faster pace in September, supported by the strongest rise in new business since January. And the headline, HCOB Spain Services PMI Business Activity Index rose to 54.3 in September from 53.2 in August. And then in France, industrial production unexpectedly dropped in August, adding to signals of sluggishness in the euro area's second largest economy as businesses and households face heightened political and fiscal uncertainty. And there are positive revenue prospects for European Bank. And I believe that's the much we can take. It's almost time for news track. So I'll just let this go. And thank you so much for being a part of this.